Ladies and gentlemen, I am the American Spy Fox, and welcome to the channel. Today, we have a special guest, John Potash. Now, you're a number of things, right? I've read a little about you. Activist, writer. I think you wrote a documentary, a couple books out there. Would you like to tell everybody, just in case they're not familiar with you, a little bit about your history?
Sure. Well, I've been working as a psychotherapist for a living, but I've been writing books. I first wrote the FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders,
Mm-hmm.
which now is titled just the FBI War on Tupac Shakur, as it got republished by a new publishing company just this past year. But that was really like a diversion, a tangent from the original project, which was Drugs as Weapons Against Us, the CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists. So that was really the big project I was working on, but I took that tangent. And then I got back to the original work, which I came out with this book in 2015 with Trine Day Publishing, and then I turned it into a film in 2019. That came out January 2019. And the FBI War on Tupac book, I made a film, just a really rudimentary film on that. I published that book in 2007 and came out with the documentary in 2009.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so here's a question that I'm just curious about. I've noticed a lot of documentaries over the last few years seem to be, I think, produced by a company called Gravitas or something like that.
Well, that's my distributor of my first documentary. Sorry, of my
Yeah.
Drugs as Weapons Against Us, this documentary, and the subtitle is The CIA War on Musicians and Activists. It's Gravitas Ventures. They're a big distributor. They also are a movie studio, but they got both arms. And the movie studio is one, has been nominated for an Academy Award for documentaries. So
Yeah.
they've gotten pretty big. So I'm glad to be distributed by them.
Yeah,
And
I noticed a couple Nick Broomfield documentaries were distributed by Gravitas. I was just curious. I did watch the documentary. I didn't get to read your entire book, but I find it
okay.
very, very fascinating that you were capable of connecting all these dots, especially going all the way back to the Opium Wars. But it makes sense. Like, you watch it and you're like, okay, because we all know that the rich and the powerful have control, but you don't really know why. You know what I mean? Like, where did their money come from? Where did their control come from? And if you've looked at my channel at all, a lot of it is based around Nirvana and Kurt Cobain. We're just now getting into Hendrix, and Tupac was a request. That's what led me to you. Would you care to all talk about your book in relation to these people? Just anything you would like to say?
Yeah, sure. No, I think they're all connected because they all were so, some of the most popular musicians in the world. I mean, arguably Tupac and Kurt Cobain were the two most popular musicians in the world at the time of their deaths. Cobain was on top of the charts when he died, and then Tupac was on top of the charts when he died. And and of course, you could say the same about John Lennon. He reached the top as the most influential musician at one point. And
And
Jimi
it's
Hendrix
crazy that people now, well, some people now compare Cobain to Lennon.
Oh, definitely.
They say he's the
They've always
Lennon of
called him.
the 90s, you know?
Yeah, they've always called him the John Lennon of his generation. I mean,
Yeah.
that's been cited many times by many different people. But and I think it's an apt and thing to say because they were both very brilliant, and they both were very political. People don't realize that Cobain was political like John Lennon was, but Cobain, that didn't come out in as many places, but he was, it came out in the biography of Nirvana that came out like a year before Cobain died, by
Michael Azerrad.
By Michael Azerrad,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And one of the interesting things of that is that one of the chapters opens up with big print saying with a quote from Cobain saying, we first wanted to put all kinds of anarchistic essays about how to build your own bomb and things like that when we, on the
Yeah.
cover of Nevermind. But then we thought we better hold off on that. We should wait till we get more popular when we could actually, people might actually take it seriously. And so that's just a sample of his radical politics. As he was very anti-capitalist and very radical. How serious was he completely? That's debatable, of course, but he always threw out these anti-capitalist kinds of statements, and he always talked about, made fun of the fat cats and their big hats with their cigars, and was very said, like mainstream media, what do you say? He had something written on his shirt about corporate media still
Corporate
sucks.
magazines still suck.
Still suck. Yeah, I mean, he was very anti-establishment,
On the cover of Rolling Stone.
Right, on the cover of Rolling Stone, right. And so that's, and they allowed that because they were a little bit more marginal of magazines, and so that's just who he was, and so people don't realize that, and that's the way he was. It's why it makes sense that he was more the John Lennon of his generation. John Lennon, talked about being a socialist at times. He had the Black Panthers on when he was allowed to host, I think it was the Merv Griffin show for a week. He invited on different Black Panthers to interview, and he invited on some just radical activists that were considered themselves socialist or communist, believe it or not. And so they were all anti-war. The Black Panthers were anti-war, of course. The other anti-war activists he had on there, he talked about ending the war and stuff. And so that's what why they were also a threat to the powers that be. And so
right, was my next question.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, and so the powers that be, what the little appreciated aspect of the Vietnam War and wars in general, sadly enough, are they're about resources. And the Vietnam War in particular was about one very profitable resource, which is the poppy fields and the opium, that comes from those poppy fields and the golden triangle for opium of Vietnam. And so in Afghanistan, it's the Golden Crescent for poppy fields. And they're both at two ends of the same mountain range where the best poppy fields in the world, can rise up. Where the most heroin in the world comes from and the most opium, comes from. And so that's incredibly profitable resource. And the CIA has been caught trafficking drugs for decades. And the oligarchs have been behind drug trafficking for centuries. And
it's funny when you hear the word oligarch, you immediately think like Russian gangster, Russian government.
That's the way
but we have our oligarchs too, right?
Yeah, of course. That's the way they want to spin it.
We just don't use that word.
Right. But it was J.P. Morgan ships. J.P. Morgan owned ships that were caught with a ton of cocaine in Philadelphia in the past few years. Okay, and this is what they're doing. They're still shipping illicit drugs and making tons of money off of illicit drugs.
Let me interrupt you there for a second, because you bring up shipping. I just found an interview with Courtney Love where she was asked, when is the first time you did heroin? And she says, well, I'm sorry, when is the first time you tried cocaine? And she says, well, I thought it was supposed to be cocaine, but it ended up being heroin. And I did it with a Filipino shipping tycoon. And I thought that was so weird. She said, I was in Japan doing drugs with a Filipino shipping tycoon. Like it was just everyday life.
Right.
Yeah,
it's so bizarre. Her life is so bizarre that you have to think, what in the world? And it only makes sense when you realize she was doing the bidding of the CIA. And that's as out there as it sounds, it starts to make sense when you realize that, yes, as a teenager, she was working for the Japanese mafia as a stripper. And this comes out in authorized biographies of her. She's working.
Well, she actually got really PO'd at Melissa Rossi. Apparently the whole slave trade part of it was not supposed to be mentioned, but Rossi mentioned it anyway.
Yeah. And so, yeah, Rossi went deeper than anyone else in her biography of Courtney Love, but it's well researched evidence. Rossi got a letter from Courtney Love's boyfriend I'm sorry, from Love to her boyfriend saying, I prostituted myself to get money to come back to you. Okay.
Oh, are you talking about the guy that was in the Portland band,
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
Roz Rozabek or something like
Right.
that?
Right. And so,
Wow.
yeah, and so this is like she admits that she was working as a prostitute, and her dad said she was tricking on the streets of Ireland in Dublin when he was there doing research for a book in Ireland. And so, and meanwhile, she just turned 17, and here she is prostituting herself. Her dad says, and she had been doing that in the United States. She was doing that in Japan when she was stripping. In Japan, stripping. Like she said, she was involved in live acts and stuff. So anyway, she's all involved in this stuff as a teenager. So of
So
course,
it's normalized for her. It's
it's
like something
normalized,
that
right? Right. It's normalized for her. So whatever else you even think about her history, if she can be, if prostitution is normalized for her, of course the CIA can use her as a prostitute if they want to go and start a relationship with a guy and have get pregnant with him quickly, and he feels like, well, I got to do the right thing and marry her, which of course Kurt Cobain did, and then she completely ruins his life in different ways. I mean, she's just so out there, sleeping with Billy Corgan and
Evan
whoever else.
Dando, she
Yeah, and
totally alienated his
right,
friends from his hometown. She had no use for them. She just, you
right,
know,
right. And
yeah.
so, but the more important thing about the situation with her dad is that when she was visiting her dad, it all, it gets much deeper, and I won't go into the deeper part yet unless you want me to later. But she's visiting him, and he has a guy in his, who like befriends him, who named Stephen O'Leary. Stephen O'Leary says, "Oh, I'm a big Deadhead, and I just want to say, I love that Dead. He used to be a manager for the Grateful Dead. Courtney Love's father, Hank Harrison.
Yeah, I believe he was the manager for the first lineup of the Grateful
The
Dead.
Warlocks, yeah, for the
Yeah.
Warlocks, the first 6 months, and he stayed friends with Phil Lesh and all that stuff. But so he says, "Oh, I'm a big Grateful Dead fan. I really liked your book about the Dead and all that." He befriends them, and so this guy then takes Courtney Love and takes her to Liverpool, where she has 1,000 hits of acid on her. In all the mainstream biographies, talk about this, but whatever, she brings 1,000 hits of acid and distributes it to musicians in the upcoming Liverpool scene, like
That
candy.
would have been the 80s pop scene in
Yeah,
Liverpool.
yeah,
Teardrop
yeah.
Explodes, Echo and the Bunnymen.
Right, right. Chewing cope and all that, and so yeah, and so she duplicates the same actions as the assistant director of MK Ultra. Okay. Now, MK Ultra was a CIA project started in 1953 with 149 sub projects, and and its own documents say that it's the use of drugs for unconventional warfare. Okay. And so when you find out who are they using this drugs for unconventional
Unconventional.
warfare on, when you think of warfare, you think of soldiers in foreign lands. But actually, what you find is that they're using these drugs on anyone who dissents against the government doctrine. Anyone who dissents against war, who puts up dissent against civil rights. Against segregation. And
Yeah.
and the and all that, and disenfranchisement of blacks and other people of color and stuff like that. So that's who this was used against. Like one of the most famous first people they used some of these drugs, use psychedelics against, acid and other drugs against, was Paul Robeson, the famous singer. He was known as the best singer in the world. He was a great actor. He was a Columbia University trained lawyer. He was incredibly outspoken about civil rights. He was scheduled to meet with Che Guevara and Fidel Castro several
Oh,
weeks
really?
several weeks before he was dosed in a Russian hotel, in a Soviet hotel, Soviet Union hotel, like a Moscow hotel, where he was doing concerts there in the Soviet Union. He was politically targeted his whole life. They took away his passport for a while. He had done tons of like worker organizing protests and rallies where he would sing and support the workers at at strikes and rallies for union workers and farm workers and coal miners and etc. So he was a beloved activist by whites and blacks around the world for his activism. And so they
just real quick, was this a
Sure.
white or a black guy?
So Paul Robeson was a black man.
He was a black guy. Okay.
Yeah, and they
this
dosed,
is around what time is this?
This is 1961.
Okay, so a little bit different than things are today. A lot different than things are today.
Yeah, sure. So he's got an adult son, Paul Robeson Jr., but he's in Moscow doing this, and they dose his drink with either BZ or LSD. His son didn't know which, but he thought,
okay, BZ. That's a bit different. I've heard of this. That's more potent, more hallucinogenic.
Yeah, it's more potent than LSD, but if you put in enough LSD, they could be close to the same potency.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Depends on how much LSD,
Just for anybody who didn't know what that is.
Yeah, sure. BZ is just like a super psychedelic. But so they do that to him. He thought he thought he was losing his mind. People didn't know what these psychedelics were in 1961.
Right.
He calls his family in the United States. His adult son comes out there to see what's going on. These people dose his adult son also. Okay, so he had gotten dosed at a party that some anti-Soviet Americans had invited him to, because they got in a room right next to his, and they talked him into coming to this party, then dosed his drink there. So they dosed his son. His son, said he was lucky he only got a sip of his drink and didn't go as intensely into a long trip as his dad did. So they basically end up just really hurting his dad's mind. They convinced him to try, get hospitalized for what it did to his mind, and they gave him overly, high doses of ECT, electroconvulsive shock treatment. So this is just one example of what they did with psychedelics with this Project MK Ultra. Project MK Ultra though had dozens and dozens of drugs that they used as unconventional warfare, and it included the basic drugs everyone knows, like cocaine and heroin and all that.
Sure.
But it also included all these other different exotic drugs, ecstasy, and Tuanols and Secanols and all kinds of other drugs that the CIA could come up with to use for this unconventional warfare. STP, things like that, DMT.
And they have the chemist. I'm sure they had all kinds of variations.
Yeah, and some of the chemists were Nazi chemists that originally experimented with these kinds of drugs on concentration camp victims.
I'm sorry. At the beginning of this conversation, you said you kind of shrugged and you're like, people think it's crazy, but
so
I was one of those people, and now I'm like, oh my God, all this shit makes sense. And then I've read about Charles Manson and like, please continue. You're doing awesome, man.
Right, thank you. So the assistant director of MK Ultra was a guy named Robert Lashbrook. In 1965, Robert Lashbrook was sent to London, and he came there. And this came from a book by A.E. Hotchner, who was one of the editors for Ernest Hemingway. So he's an established writer and historian, A.E. Hotchner. Hotchner writes a book about the history of the Rolling Stones and the London scene, and he says that this assistant director of MK Ultra, Lashbrook, comes to London with loads of acid, loads of agents, and loads of money, and directs the agents to get the acid in as many musicians' hands as possible. Okay.
Really?
So they were targeting musicians, and this is the beginning of 1965. By the middle of 1965, George Harrison's dentist dosed John Lennon and George Harrison at a small dinner party where they just had, he had the two over with their partners, and dosed them.
The dentist?
The dentist gave them acid against their will. Okay, so that was part of MK Ultra, obviously. I mean, again, this happened to also Mick Jagger. a guy, an undercover agent named Schneiderman, David Schneiderman, according to the Daily Mail, the London daily newspaper, said that an undercover FBI agent who also worked for MI6, which is British
British
FBI, I'm sorry,
intelligence.
MI5, which is British FBI, was considered the acid king, and he convinced Mick Jagger to try his first hit of acid. And so this again is an extension of MK Ultra. And so this is what was going on. Now you jump 20 years later, and you're in the 1980s, and here's Courtney Love replicating those behaviors, trying to
She's
get
always she's every music scene that popped up since she was a teenager, she was right there in the middle.
Yeah, and distributing drugs like candy. Yeah,
London, Portland, San Francisco, Chicago, Seattle.
Yeah,
it
right.
just amazes me. Like, how can
Right.
someone always know where to go?
Right.
You know.
Now, so here we are. We're in the 80s. She's distributing acid like like candy all through these.
Do you think maybe that's why she was able to assimilate herself with these musicians, because they wanted to experiment and she had drugs?
Well, I think she just pushed it on him for one thing, and she also pushed it on him with
Kind of
sex.
a pushy character.
Well, but she also, she was a 17-year-old girl looking to have sex with them too.
Right.
And she also pushed drugs on at the same time. So she, like sold it with sex and drugs, whatever. But
right.
And that's the way they sell lots of things, is with sex, of course. But nonetheless, so Stephen O'Leary, who was guiding her, who took her to the Liverpool scene,
he the guy that was friends with Hank Harrison.
He was who was temporarily friends with Hank Harrison. When this guy Stephen O'Leary got cancer young and died young, but he was with his brother Kevin O'Leary, according to Hank Harrison. But when he was on his deathbed, Stephen O'Leary, he wrote a letter to Hank Harrison. Hank Harrison published it in the first version of his book about his daughter, and that letter said, "Well, I wasn't officially, with the CIA or U.S. intelligence. I just reported to the embassy, the U.S. embassy, weekly, when what I was doing, because he was doing something for U.S. intelligence,
some kind of subordinate."
Yeah. He was admitting that he was working for U.S. intelligence some way, even though he was an official agent. Okay.
Wow.
And when he was traveling with Courtney Love, and having sex with her, and meanwhile he was also guided by his brother, and Hank Harrison says his brother appeared higher up from Stephen O'Leary. His brother's name was Kevin O'Leary, and so you see a lot of pictures with Courtney Love and Kevin O'Leary now. And people are like, what's Courtney Love doing with Kevin O'Leary from Shark Tank? Kevin O'Leary. But all I know is I verified this by finding an obituary of Stephen O'Leary exactly when Hank Harrison said he was dying, and died in I believe it was Minnesota. But I have a picture of the obituary in there. Kevin O'Leary is Stephen O'Leary's brother. That was this Stephen O'Leary died in Minnesota, spent a lot of time in Ireland at the same time that Hank Harrison said. So I verified all this through an obituary of this guy, and so I don't believe, I can't say I believe everything Hank Harrison says, but the stuff I repeated from Hank Harrison, most of it I could verify.
Right.
So this is the kind of stuff that backs the links. But there's so much more. I mean, the massive police cover up of an obvious murder. You got Cyril Weck saying that this is a murder. I believe this is a murder. I
think that is amazing. It's amazing to me that this guy says, I can't even remember how many autopsies he's been a part of. And he says, right. I asked him, how many times has this happened? Thinking he would say, oh, it's rare. And he said 0.
Right.
And nobody's listening to him. Why do we have world experts if they don't, and then you start thinking, well, who has the power to not listen?
Right. Who has the power to shut everyone up? Besides the fact that the partner is usually the leading suspect in the first place when there's a mysterious death. You also had the fact
so much money on the line.
Yeah, you had the fact that Cobain was divorcing her. So when that's happening, of course, she's the top suspect.
Hey, you want to hear something really interesting?
Yeah.
I've listened to hours and hours. If you listen to Courtney long enough, she'll tell you stuff,
Mhm.
because she
Yeah, of
just can't
course.
help it. And I think she knows that it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah,
Like nobody's gonna
yeah,
do anything to me. She actually, there was a lot of talk about Kurt creating a will, obviously divorcing and creating a will that
cutting
just
her out of his
pushed her out.
will.
She says in an interview on a British radio station, after Kurt died, I had to go to court a lot. I was flying back to Seattle to go to court, trying to get rid of wills. And then she abruptly stops and changes the subject. So there was a will,
Yeah,
he did have
yeah,
um, a will
yeah,
in place that would exclude her. But unfortunately, he apparently died before he could sign it with witnesses. You have to have
right.
witnesses and an attorney present. So, but at some point, she did fight that will, and she let us know it. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? A
yeah,
lot of people
yeah.
think that that's bullshit. A lot of I guess believers of Courtney or whatever you want to call them, fans, they'll say there was no will. He loved her. Blah blah blah. She admitted it in a radio interview.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much more to that too, but
I have a good question for you.
yeah, sure.
As far as obviously these musicians, and I tried to explain to my audience, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, even Biggie, these weren't just regular celebrities. These guys had obtained a level of fame beyond a lot of celebrities, and
Hmm.
especially Cobain and Lennon.
Yeah,
Their opinion could sway entire populations of youth. So
yeah, no doubt.
I guess what I'm asking you is, attacking these people with drugs, is it just to lower their ambition, to sort of get their mind on drugs and away from anything political?
Well, I think it's partly manipulating them to lead them to promote these drugs inadvertently. So when people like as I say, I do psychotherapy for a living, and I used to do a lot of addictions counseling, and I had a young talented guitarist who had a heroin problem, and I said, so what, when did it start? What influenced you to start using heroin? He said, well, I loved Kurt Cobain, and I
Oh
thought that
wow,
it could give me that edge that Kurt Cobain had.
creativity.
Yeah, and so it just it influenced now, and I show the documentation of this when during in the mid '90s, from about '90 to '95, the you know the amount of heroin use went up astronomically. So they were successful at promoting heroin through these alternative musicians, sadly enough. And
Yeah.
now what happened was all these musicians also threatened to promote sobriety in the last months of their life. Cobain said he found a
Yeah.
cure to his stomach problem, and he says, and the best evidence is that he wasn't using any drugs in the last months of his life. The
And
Rome,
to this day, Courtney Love says that one of the reasons he killed himself was because of his stomach problems.
yeah,
Although he was in an interview saying my
right,
stomach problem is cured.
right. He finally found a medicine that could cure that cured his stomach problem, and he you know they basically the authors of Who Killed Kurt Cobain and Love and Death, Halpern and Wallace, said they got the blood test from Rome, and they talked to the doctor in Rome, and it was completely clear of any illicit drugs. And everyone knows, well, you shouldn't. I mean, not everyone knows, but I know because I was in addictions counseling for a while. That
Right.
heroin and cocaine stay in your system about 3 to 5 days, and if you're a heroin addict, you need it every day. And so if you were using heroin, if you were an active heroin addict, you would have to have heroin in your system at the time. He had no heroin in his system whatsoever. So he was not an active heroin addict at that time. And that
Right.
blood test was done about a month before his death. And, from the situation where he got the roofies in his champagne, that
Wait,
that
wait,
was
I did
that was
not
Courtney
know
Love's
this.
prescription. That was Courtney Love's prescription. Yeah. So
Yeah,
she moved
the
him.
Rohypnol.
Rohypnol's roofies. Yeah.
Didn't
So
she like claim he took an entire prescription, like 50 pills or something ridiculous?
yeah, that's what she claims. But the best evidence is, since they were her prescription, and the only reason he saw her then is to see his, Frances, to see his daughter Frances. So she brought Francis to him when he was in Rome, and and she put something. She put the Rohypnol in his drink, most likely. I'm not saying I know that, but it was her prescription. She brought her prescription into that room, and obviously the best evidence is that she put him in his drink, put it in his drink.
Could be possible that maybe he took one or two and then she put more in his drink, so he just thought, man, that really kicked my butt, when he wakes up 2 days later.
That's possible too, sure, but
I know the doctor did say that there was not 50 pills in his stomach, or he said no, this wasn't a suicide attempt. He didn't take the entire prescription.
Gotcha.
The narrative that Courtney was giving the media was not correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah, John, I must have not have paid my membership this month. If you would like to talk more, we just have to start over again.
Yeah, we could do that. Sure. Yeah.
Okay, but we still have a couple minutes. In the near future, people have been asking me to talk about Tupac. I don't know a whole lot about Tupac. That's something I've just started reading about.
Yeah.
But if you would care,
I'll try to give it in a nutshell. Tupac was a like lifelong radical activist. Because
I do know his mother was a Black Panther, I believe.
His mother was a Black Panther leader, one time leader of the Harlem Black Panthers. His father was a Black Panther. He was raised, by Black Panther extended family. He by the time he was 17 years old, he was elected the youngest ever national chairman of a group called the New African Panthers, which was trying to replicate the Black Panthers. So he was already a national Black leader before he became a rapper. Once he became a rapper, he took on a new plan. He pretended to be a gangster, in order to appeal to gangs and politicize them. That was part of his Black Panther extended family's work in trying to get the Bloods and Crips to call peace truces and turn on to activism. And so that's not who he really was. Even though he acted like a gangster, he really was a dedicated Black activist leader who was like an intellectual prodigy. He read dozens of PhD level books. I mean, really.
I actually heard he published a book of poetry at like the age of 19.
Yeah, he finished.
And it's like beautiful poetry. It's not,
Yeah, I mean, he had finished the poems in that book, before he was even like 20 or so. Yeah, right. And so, then it came out after his death. But he had read literally hundreds of PhD level books is actually what Michael Eric Dyson described in his book, looking at his huge library that he read before he was out of his teen years. So he's an intellectual prodigy who only hid behind this gangster facade. And it's too bad people didn't get to know that side of him. He would rewrite Shakespeare plays and produce them and star him when he was still in high school.
Wow.
And that's what he could do because he was so brilliant. But he sadly, there was about 6 attempts to kill him, all linked to U.S. intelligence before they were successful. And and it's just like a high-level police detective in Los Angeles, Russell Poole. Poole ends up dying young because of the honest work he was doing, sadly enough. But first, they demoted him for his honest work when he found dozens and dozens.
Demoted him.
Yeah, they demoted him. He found dozens and dozens of his fellow police officers at all levels of death row records. And he asked his superiors, what are they doing there? And the superior said, you can call them troubleshooters or covert agents. And that was their words, And so they were, so when you look at everything death row was doing, they were trafficking drugs, they were trafficking guns, they were trying to end the Bloods versus Crips peace truce that Tupac had helped engender. And so they were doing all the opposite of what Tupac was trying to do. Tupac was doing his activism with his Black Panther extended family. But so Death Row Records appeared to be a U.S. intelligence front company. Now, of course, Snoop was,
I know it. I know in the 90s, it was $1 billion. For anybody who wants to maybe laugh at that, it was $1 billion company.
Yeah.
This was a huge moneymaker.
And so, they were instantly huge. And they, they were doing all kinds of criminal activity, according to Russell Poole. And the police weren't doing anything about it because they were part of it. And so that's a sign of a, U.S. intelligence front company, of course. Let me see. I had left off with the fact that the situation with Tupac Shakur, really, it just showed the evidence of U.S. intelligence was very active in the 90s. According to Russell Poole, his fellow officers, he told award-winning filmmaker Nick Broomfield that he believes that his fellow police officers in Los Angeles Police Department murdered Biggie to cover up their murder of Tupac Shakur.
To make it seem like an East Coast, West Coast gang rivalry.
Exactly.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah, because Biggie wasn't political, but of course Tupac was very political and was going against.
Biggie sort of championed poor Black communities. A lot of his lyrics, from what I've read, was just sort of, I hate to use this word, but sort of justifying the criminal actions of young Black men because they're just trying to feed their children, and that we don't have opportunity. So what else are we going to do?
But that, which isn't terrible, but it was he was a good writer, good songwriter, good rapper.
Oh, absolutely.
About just reflecting what was going on in Brooklyn at the time,
right.
His neighborhood where he grew up. And of course,
and that's what I'm saying. I don't think he had a bigger worldview than that. I think he was innocent. He's just from the heart,
right.
Where Tupac was probably involved in a lot more worldly.
Yeah, Tupac wanted to save young Black males. He was on a mission to save young Black males from all the oppression of the state, really, racism and other things and the ills of society. And but he ended up saying he really wanted to help, all the disenfranchised, peoples. And that's why he was beloved universally, even by I get messages from white people in Serbia and Croatia who said
really?
Yeah, saying they all love Tupac, they love Tupac. He helped them keep going. They felt like he was their champion. And so the important thing about Tupac, though, is one of the important things is I mentioned, he was a target of the counterintelligence program, and I would argue I show the evidence why he was also a target of Project MK Ultra. And the reason is now they officially ended the counterintelligence program. That was an FBI program targeting leftists in general, but particularly brutally targeting Black leftists. And that ended in 1971 only because anti-war activists broke into an FBI office, stole all the documents, and made them public.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, M. Wesley Swearingen, who was a COINTELPRO agent in Los Angeles, said that they pretended to end the counterintelligence program, which shortened as COINTELPRO, but they really continued it under different names, at least until the mid-1990s when Wes Swearingen came out with his memoir, published his memoir. I don't know what I just heard outside my window, but anyway, now Phil Agee was a CIA whistleblower and a great activist, and he started a great magazine, Covert Action Magazine, which I've written a lot of articles for about Tupac, about Kurt Cobain, about drugs and all this stuff. But anyway, Phil Agee said that they did the same thing with MK Ultra. They pretended to end it, and the CIA director shredded as many documents as he could. But there were still 10 or 20,000 documents. I'm sorry, maybe it was even actually 20 or 30,000 documents left in the accounting department, and he didn't get to shred all them.
I heard about this. I can't remember his name. He was a guest on Joe Rogan. He was talking about the whole Manson thing.
Tom O'Neill
said that the only documents he was able to find were accounting documents.
Yeah, they were all in the accounting department.
They just shredded most everything else.
Right. And so great researchers of MK Ultra, such as I just forgot his name, who wrote the book Acid Dreams, Martin Lee, went through all these documents and said that the best estimates were that they were just 10% of the total. So if they were, they found 20 or 30,000 documents, there was about 200,000 or 300,000 that were shredded, total that that were shredded or so. So nonetheless, the important thing is that Phil Agee and other whistleblowers say that they continued MK Ultra under different names. So most researchers believe they continue it till today. And so in the 1990s,
Wow.
MK Ultra was still happening. They were still using drugs for unconventional warfare. They were still manipulating musicians to try to get them to promote drugs. And when they, got sober and threatened to promote sobriety, like John Lennon did, like Tupac did right before he died, he was a witness at parties where everybody's drinking and smoking weed, and he didn't touch any alcohol or weed. He just danced the whole night, according to top, rap producer Russell Simmons. So these guys were threatening to promote sobriety at the end of their lives, and that's part of the reason, part of the many, some of the many reasons they were done away with. But with MK Ultra still happening in the 1990s, you see Courtney Love's actions in a different light. You see that when she's replicating the MK Ultra actions of Robert Lashbrook with bringing all the acid to musicians in the 1980s, and then doing the same and promoting all these drugs in the 1990s, and making big headlines about her heroin use. And even after Cobain dies, she's interviewed on Barbara Walters, and she talks about how acid can make you a genius at math, or cocaine can make you a genius in math, and acid could have made, her dad thought that acid could make her a genius. It's just bizarre comments, it's just really,
Yeah.
crazy comments like that. But she's promoting the drugs in the same way MK Ultra is trying to promote the drugs to sideline, to get youth to get involved in drugs, and it'll take them away from any kind of really positive activism.
Is it so? It's easier to control a population who's sort of dumbfounded, and
Exactly. Exactly.
when your main goal every day is to get a drug, you're not thinking about making a change.
Right, right. And when you're doing acid, you're muddling your mind a bit, and now Karl Marx called it, the opiate. Religion says religion's the opiate of the masses. That shows that opiates are religion of the masses. You can just turn them around. That's what the powers that be want to do. They want to make opiate the religion of the masses.
Wasn't it one of the founding fathers called religion mass hysteria or something like that? But we won't get into that.
That's
Right.
fine. Yeah, we're not going to talk about that, but
Right.
but nonetheless, yeah. I mean, that's the new religion of youth. That's what the CIA tries to do. They try to control our hearts and minds,
Yeah.
and that's what one of the threats of these great musicians is they have the best ability, arguably, of anybody at influencing young adults' hearts and minds.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially some people who are considered poetic,
Hmm.
like Lennon and Cobain, where you can
Yeah.
interpret their lyrics the way you want to, and it makes you feel a certain way. Yeah, I
Right.
totally get that. Can I back up for a second?
Mhm.
What exactly was Operation Mockingbird?
So,
Does that have to do with the media?
yeah, that was about media control by the CIA and U.S. intelligence,
And a
the
lot of
Pentagon, et
the
cetera.
wealthiest families were purchasing media outlets. Is
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to that, and that's why
Yeah, okay.
but I'll tell you, I'll talk a little bit about it. There's a whole chapter. I have a whole chapter in, or two actually in
Oh,
both my
by the way,
books.
where can you can I know you can purchase the book on Amazon. Is there any other place people can purchase your books?
Yeah, I mean, my books are available on Amazon. My new version of FBI War on Tupac book is available at lots of Barnes and Nobles.
Barnes and
You can
Noble. I
order.
give away Barnes and Noble gift cards
That's great.
during live chats. So cool.
Great. And you can order Drugs as Weapons Against Us at most Barnes and Nobles and get it within a few days. But you can also get it from me if you want it. JohnPotash.com,
Your website.
JohnPotash.com. It's got a few other different names like drugsasweapons.com and FBIWarOnTupac.com. So,
Hey, I
but
mentioned it in a couple different community posts,
mhm.
just to sort of hint around that you special guests coming up. I thought it was pretty obvious, but people knew, like they knew about your book, and they were educating me.
Oh, thanks. Great.
So I was like, okay, this is definitely a road worth going down.
I'm glad. Thanks for doing that, and thanks for telling me.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it's these different musicians being targeted, it's just further evidence of each other's targeting, about some of the similar tactics used with John Lennon. I hate to say it, I don't even want to, I didn't go down this road in depth in my book, but It came out in a recent a recent biography by a journalist that was friends with John Lennon and Yoko Ono. He said Yoko Ono was first got John Lennon hooked on heroin. And that's another parallel between Courtney Love and Kurt
And
Cobain.
she used to call herself Yoko.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, this and Yoko Ono came from a family that was supposedly one of the an aristocratic family in Japan, one of the top 5 banking families in Japan. And so
I did not know that.
yeah. Now, if you look at Lennon's interviews, like such as with Jan Wenner of Rolling Stone, John Lennon tried to give up acid completely, and he did for about a year or two, and because he says it was just destroying his mind. He thought he was losing his mind on acid, and then 2 key people convinced him to use acid again, and one of them was his publicist, who was a publicist for a lot of suspicious people, and the other was Yoko Ono. And so again, you see the parallel there, and that's because they find the best evidence is that when people start doing acid, they're more easy to manipulate. That's what the research shows.
Wow.
And so yeah,
it's a parallel with Hendrix too. He had a lady who would I read that I'm sorry, I'm sure you know her
that's
name.
fine.
He would take her around the world with him because it was said that she could get drugs wherever they went.
Well, I haven't heard that about a particular partner of his, but I can definitely believe it. I know that whenever he went to parties, women, offered him tons of drugs, and I think
it was almost like like a novelty to them. Like, let's give him acid, let's give Jimi acid.
Well, I think generally speaking, people were plants. There was plants in these people's lives. With Lennon, the publicist was a plant. He was, the best evidence I think is that he was working for intelligence, because the people he represented all had intelligence connections. This one plant. With Lennon, with Jimi Hendrix, what you find is that he couldn't handle his instant fame in England. He first got big in England. He didn't get big in the United States at
playing
first
with Clapton
because of racism. But when he went to England, people like Clapton and the Rolling Stones just immediately recognized his genius, and they were much less racist over there. So he became an instant star over there.
Well, no, they were modeling their music off of Black American musicians.
True. And, yeah, and so he couldn't handle that instant stardom, because it was just he just was being asked to do so many huge shows so fast. And into his life comes this guy Michael Jeffries. And Michael Jeffrey. And Michael Jeffrey admitted being a former MI6 agent, which is, British CIA. Wow. Now, all the best evidence shows that he continued to work for MI6 undercover. And so
while he's managing Hendrix?
While he's managing, Jimi Hendrix, yeah. And so Jimi Hendrix's fiancée, Monica Danneman, said that Jimi Hendrix, got when he was wanted to do an anti-war benefit, Michael Jeffrey kept not letting him do anti-war benefits. He finally got to do an anti-war benefit, and right before the benefit, someone spiked his drink with a large amount of psychedelics, and he felt like it hurt his guitar playing, because he had stopped using psychedelics for a long while, and he wasn't used to that huge amount of psychedelics, and it messed him up, and so he stopped his anti-war benefit.
They were actually trying to stop his act.
Yeah. And so he also said that somebody planted hard drugs on him in his luggage at an airport and got him arrested. And he says he thought it was Mike Jeffrey that did it both times, with the acid and with the hard drugs. And so, he was really trying to get away from Mike Jeffrey. He was really, trying to get rid of him. He finally fires Mike Jeffrey.
Wait. Would he plant the drugs on him so he could then get him out of trouble?
Yeah, get him in trouble and then, bail him out.
Like, bail him out of jail. You need me because I can get you out of trouble.
Exactly. Yeah. And so the best evidence is that he also had a mafia group kidnap Hendrix for several days. And this is in the best, biography of Jimi Hendrix called Electric Gypsy by 2 professors. And so then he says, Mike Jeffrey claims he had a bigger mafia group free him. And so this is all intimidation tactics to not have, because Jimi Hendrix was constantly trying to get out of his contract with Jeffrey and to fire Jeffrey. And finally, Jimi Hendrix fires Jeffrey, and within 48 hours, he's dead. Okay, and it's similar to Tupac Shakur, because about within about a week and a half of him firing the real owner of Death Row Records, this guy named Dave Kenner, this lawyer, is like
Some white
underground,
dude.
yeah, it's mob lawyer. This mob lawyer is the real owner of Death Row Records, and
Oh, really?
yeah, and he was supposed to be Tupac's lawyer, and Tupac fired him, and within about 9 days of firing him, Tupac was dead. And so that's some of the parallels between those guys. But again, it was there was a lot of that. They were trying to. It was this Mike Jeffrey was trying to manipulate Hendrix to promote drugs, and then when Hendrix got away from drugs, it was just doing mild drugs, maybe drinking a little bit or smoking a little bit of weed. That was it. Not using any other drugs. He was getting into activism, Jimi Hendrix, and he was dedicated his last album to the Black Panthers. He talked about the Black Panthers in interviews, and the FBI had him under 24-hour surveillance. And according to their some of their documents, they were watching.
Are those files now public?
Well, the files aren't public, but a few of the FBI documents have made it out, and
So it tells you right there, just the fact that they have a file on him.
Yeah.
Tells you that he's of interest. The FBI would not just waste their time.
Serious interest, yeah,
right. Serious interest.
Yeah, because some of the biographies I read, talked about he had him under regular surveillance, and so and there's more to that. But again, this is the way U.S. intelligence, focused on musicians and how seriously they took these musicians.
Do you ever get a little intimidated or scared talking about these subjects?
I do, yeah, and I've been messed with, but again, I'm lucky that the fact that they censor me so much already, there's only so much, so much audience I can reach, and I think they manipulate some of the people that are connected to some of these guys to try to smear me, try to badmouth me, but look, I just do my best at presenting a clear message, and hopefully the people that hear me just understand that this is all heavily investigated and good, well end noted and researched, and
right, these aren't things you just came up with. This is years and years of research.
Right. I mean, they'll talk about it as wild conspiracy theories, but when you look at the people saying what I said they said in my film, it's they're very credible people, very credible sources.
Right. Hey, I totally get it. I mean,
thanks.
But the thing is, the people who get it, and I've had a lot of people, just my little YouTube channel comment and say, I used to think this is crazy, I think if you just keep doing what you're doing, the more and more people are going to read it and be like, hey, this guy's onto something,
Yeah, thanks, Chuck.